Welcome to A Well-Designed Business with your host, LuAnn. LuAnn has a lifetime of experience building a multi-million-dollar business with her husband and cousin, and she knows the challenges you face in your interior design business. LuAnn brings you real-life answers to your most pressing problems, as well as practical strategies to explode your interior design business. So, let's get to the business of interior design.
Well, everybody, welcome to Power Talk Friday, and I'm very happy to let you know that I have Danielle Liss with me today. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm excited too because, first of all, I just want to tell everybody, Danielle is a lawyer, and her partner, Jamie Lieberman, have a firm, and they call it HashtagLegal. So, I mean, you have me at hello. Let's just say I love that name.
Thank you.
I do. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Danielle, and then I'm going to tell you how I came to invite her to be on the podcast, and then we're going to get into it. So first of all, she is a partner and founder with Jamie of HashtagLegal, and Danielle previously was the chief marketing officer and general counsel of Fitfluential, which is an influencer network that concentrates on health and wellness initiatives. I might have to hook you up with Cheryl and Rhea after this, by the way. I'll tell you about that. Danielle has extensive experience in creating and negotiating contracts, interpreting FTC guidelines, right? And creating website policies, which is kind of interesting and something we have to talk about for our listeners, Danielle. And you've also worked for a Fortune 100 bank, and you've spent time in private practice. So in addition to all of this, you are an accomplished speaker, and you have spoken at dozens of conferences on legal issues related to bloggers and social media pros. So the thing about this is, Danielle, is that you and I are connected through Carol Cox, who is my speaking coach, and she has a podcast, Speaking Your Brand. And of course, because I adore Carol, I listen to every episode, and you were on, and I was listening to you, and I was like, I need that lady on my show.
Thank you.
Yes, I really, what I loved about there was a dozen things that I loved about your conversation, and we're going to bring a lot of those points to light here. But the number one thing that really spoke to me, Danielle, and I thought might be really helpful for my audience and the designers that are listening to us, is that you and Jamie allow a potential client to really, I'm going to just say it like this, purchase as little or as much as they want from you. And I like that idea. And what I mean by that, you guys listening, is that, for instance, that you can take advantage of a simple 1.5 hour strategy session with Danielle. And you can talk to Danielle about, how do I even start at my interior design firm? You could be having a problem with a client and you feel like, yuck, this is getting icky and I need some advice, right, Danielle? I mean, it doesn't matter. You'll do a one-off consultation with somebody.
Exactly. What we found is, so often when people are just kind of getting started in their business, what's the old saying that everybody uses? You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So it's kind of hard for people to figure out what legal services they need because they have no idea. So what we tried to offer with strategy sessions is just to give the people the opportunity to sort of sit down with us and say, okay, I really want to create a blueprint for what I need to do in my business. And it may not be that they need to take every step tomorrow, but it gives them an idea of, okay, first I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. And oftentimes people do retain us to work with them on the various steps after that, but they at least have somebody that they can talk to who understands their business, who can get them started on the right path.
I just think that is just so genius, because there's something that can be intimidating about going to see a lawyer. And let's be real, where does a lawyer usually come from? It's like, it was your mom and dad's lawyer, or, your husband's partner, his friends, with a guy across the street. And it's sort of like you said, when you don't know what you don't know, when you sit down and the clock is ticking and this lawyer is looking at you like, what do you want? How do you want to set up a business? I just love the whole concept of being able and not feeling like, it just felt like it took away all intimidation completely.
And that's our goal.
Yes.
We don't want people to feel like legal work is inaccessible. In our view, you're starting a business. This should be the most exciting thing that you're doing. And for a lot of people, it can be very overwhelming to deal with. For me, the bookkeeping, that's not my zone of genius. And that's the first thing that we outsource. But also, a lawyer should be a partner who can help your business grow, who can help you make strategic decisions. And I think that what often happens is people, number one, depending on what kind of business you're in, you may feel like your lawyer doesn't understand it. And I've heard this so many times, I hate to think that it's still happening, but people feel like their lawyers don't take their business seriously, right. That they think it's just a hobby and, oh, you can make money doing that. I've actually heard people who have had lawyers say that to them. And we want people to feel like they're supported. So that's our goal, is to take that away. Nobody needs to feel like their lawyer is looking down on them for their business. You need to feel like you have a partner. So that's our goal.
I love it. And again, it's sort of what I thought was particularly unique about the two of you is that, like you said, somebody can then go on to hire you and retain you as their lawyer. But even if they do have their dad's lawyer in town that's going to take care of them, but they want to understand and not feel like I can't ask him all these questions, that you can take, get educated, get that information. And then if you feel more comfortable dealing with somebody who's in your own town, that you can go in and sit down and talk with them or whatever, fine. But, and also too, what's interesting is I have to say, even our lawyer has been our lawyer for many years. I love him. He's the nicest person on the planet. But, sometimes it could be 5 or 6 days before he calls you back. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, it's sort of nice to feel like you're like a lawyer on demand.
Right. We try.
Yeah. We've had situations where, we just have a contract that's different from anything we've ever, handled before with any particular entity. And we're just like, can I just email this to you and you just look at it and give me your blessing on it? And it's like, 10 days, 2 weeks later, you're like, dude, could you just look at it?
Right. So, and that's so often we hear that when people get their contracts, they're like, okay, I'm good with everything except this one paragraph. Can you explain this to me? And that's the kind of thing that we like to try to work people through. Because we would say you have to understand your contracts. If you can't understand it or explain it to someone else, then that's when you need to ask for help with it for sure.
Right. And so you're talking sounds like you're talking about the contracts that we give to people, right? So here's the thing. So let's now go back to the beginning. Now that everybody understands that, I just really thought it was significant the way your company is set up. And I normally don't start a Power Talk Friday with the things that the guest offers, because it's sort of like, and at the end you can do, but I just thought it was just so impressive. So that's where we started, everybody. Now let's go to the nuts and bolts, and we're going to share some really good information. So let's just say somebody, Danielle, has reached out to you. They've scheduled a strategy session. They understand what the fee is. They're happy to pay the fee. And they are saying to you, I am just graduated from interior design school, or I've just spent 5 years working for another firm, and I'm about to set up my own firm. And I really just not sure what and how I have to start from a legal perspective. I know that there's declarations that I have to make as far as my classification as a business, but it's all pretty gray to me. What are we starting with there, Danielle?
What I usually suggest for people is, and this can almost freak people out a little bit, is think about what some of your ultimate goals are for your business, because that's going to help you to figure out what type of entity you want to form. There's two main, I think that especially if we're talking about interior design work, the first thing I want to do is urge people to form an entity. So either a corporation or an LLC. You can do it as a sole proprietor. However, you don't get any type of limited liability. And that's going to be really important, because if something goes wrong on a job, you want to make sure that you're not going to be personally responsible for a client disagreement, any judgments, any debts, anything along those lines. You want to make sure that your business is responsible for that and not you personally. Okay. You don't want to risk your house or your bank accounts or anything along those lines. So you do want to set up an entity for sure for the type of work that you are doing. So then the next decision is, what type of entity do you want to create? The two that are most common is going to be a corporation or an LLC, which an LLC stands for a limited liability company. A corporation tends to have a few more formalities. Both of them are going to be filed with your Secretary of State for wherever you're located. A corporation has, when we say more formalities, we mean things that you've got to do to keep your business moving and qualified with the state. Typically for a corporation, you're going to need to elect a board of directors, have an annual meeting, and it's just, there's a bit more paperwork that's typically involved. The one nice thing about a corporation is you can issue shares of stock. Okay. So that is something that's extremely appealing for many people, is that ability to issue those shares. An LLC is fewer formalities. Usually you file your articles of organization. You don't have to elect a board of directors. You don't have to hold annual meetings. Most of the time you have to do some type of annual filing. It all depends on what state you're in. Some do every other year. Some states you have to do a tax. It depends on where you're located and where you're filing. So there's fewer formalities, but you don't have the ability to issue shares of stock. Your ownership there is based on percentages. So what I tell people when you're kind of thinking about what are your overall goals, are you thinking about bringing on investors? Are you interested in reaching out to a venture capital firm? If you are, and that's something that's really on the horizon for you, I'm going to recommend that you do a corporation because you want that ability to issue shares of stock. Okay. If you are not planning to go that route, many times you will be covered well with an LLC.
Okay, so let's review this for a second. So we're just established that sole proprietor, it sounds like there's no upside. Is there an upside? Because you said that if you're a sole proprietor and something goes wrong on a job, your personal life is on the line. Your personal assets and your personal property is on the line. So, and let's clarify that a little further. So for instance, I'm an interior designer. I have a sole proprietorship. I have hired a painter. He has fallen off the ladder, cancel, and right through the aquarium, cancel, and there's, nonsense all over the house, and their $20,000 Tibetan rug is ruined. So are we saying that if I'm a sole proprietor, I'm going to be personally on the line for that, or am I taking that way down crazy lane?
That example hurts my heart. That is that's the kind of thing that we write law school exams off of. But
okay.
yeah,
that's okay. So I'm on the mark with that. That's a
dispute,
real thing.
You're going to be responsible for it. Whereas if it's your LLC, no one can collect more than what your LLC has. So it's going to be something that your LLC would then cover, and you would most likely have an insurance policy for your LLC, so that aspect would be covered. Now you asked, are there pros to being a sole proprietor? You don't have to do anything. And that's usually the pro, is you don't have to file something with the Secretary of State. Most of the time you are going to need a business license depending on where you're located, but that will vary by jurisdiction. So a lot of people are like, I'm not making money yet. I'm just getting started. I don't want to have to invest the money to create a different type of corporate form. Okay. I usually say, depending on the kind of business that you're in, it's going to be a really good idea to form that, especially around the time that you get a client who's going to be hiring you. That's when it's the right time to make the investment. As soon as you start making money and you're going to be working on client projects, that's when you really would want to make sure you've got that entity formed.
Okay. And I have two questions in there. One is, going back to my example, it occurred to me after I said the example, the painter would have he would have liability in there too. But if he were also a sole proprietor, then the homeowner is probably in any case, the homeowner is going to go after both of us to begin with, just because that's how these things go. But
typically.
Yes. But now, is there a possibility that if the painter is an LLC or a corporation, that his insurance and his things would take care of it, and then our responsibility is left off? Or do you think in that case the homeowner is going to come to both of you no matter what? And I know we're not talking about each homeowner is motivated personally by a different thing, but we're talking about when somebody is motivated to go after somebody.
I think most of the time you're going to see all of the contractors brought into it. Okay. Because it's most likely that your sub would then try to say that it was some type of condition that you created.
Right.
Once upon a time when I was in private practice, I worked in construction law. So typically what would happen is whoever the main contractor is gets brought in, and then whoever the subcontractor is gets brought in.
Right.
That's not to say it's always the case.
Right.
But usually
it's potentially the case is really the point. And that's what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
It's potentially the case. So now the second question I had in there is when the pro is that you don't have to file anything and you don't have to pay to file the things that it costs to file an LLC or a corporation. I mean, when we did this, it was, you probably weren't even born yet. So I don't have any idea what it cost, and I don't know what it cost then or now. What are we talking about? What does it cost to file the paperwork to be either an LLC or a corporation?
It depends on where you live. And I hate when people give the lawyer answer of yes, but, or it depends, but it really does depend on where you live.
Ranges, though.
Most of the time, I have seen as low as $80 to file an LLC. I have seen California tends to be on the higher side. California, their filing fee for an LLC is, I think it's $80. But each year, you're required to pay an $800 franchise tax. So that's kind of where they get you, is it just check on what your fees are. Most of the time I see somewhere between $300 to $500.
Okay. So I don't know, I'm a little bit of a hard line on things. I feel like if you're a grown up and you're having a grown up business, this is one of the expenses of having a business, and do it right. Because I don't really, other than not costing you money, it seems like sole proprietor is just a whole lot of risk.
I agree. And to me, if you're starting your business, there's always startup costs. Always.
Yes, right, exactly.
And unfortunately, people tend to want to do what I refer to as the sexier things first. They want to get a perfect website design. They want to get perfect, creatives done for their business. And while that is 100% valid and a really good expense, don't skip on the legal just because it's not something that you see building your brand, because it's just as important to make sure that your business has the right setup.
Right. I just don't see the logic in spending the money on all of the other things and working as hard as a self-employed interior designer works, and then to have some painter or some mishap or some electrical thing, eat it all back up. It's like, whoa, back to scratch. Everything's done. It's to me, it's insanity, honestly. So, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, to me, it would be like buying a car. And you remember when you were a kid and your dad's like, you gotta keep the oil in the car or the engine will blow up. It's like,
yes, I'm pretty sure he said that exact thing to me.
Exactly. Like the first time your dad checked your oil when you didn't know it, he's like, there's no way, I've got to a court. And it's like, you understand that it seems like this invisible thing, but that is the protection for the engine, and this is the protection for your business, Okay, so all right, so I think that I'm pretty well convinced that everybody better at minimum have an LLC or a corporation. Okay. Now, I thought other areas that you could help us out with, Danielle, would be figuring out and crafting our letter of agreement with our clients. I'm assuming now, because my business is different and I've never had to craft a letter of agreement, and that's where I'm a little at a disadvantage, with speaking to this, but I got to believe that there's different places that designers get their letters of agreement, whether it comes from an example from school or from a previous employer, or I don't know if you can Google the darn thing on the internet, but talk to us about the importance of that letter of agreement and the types of things that you suggest that they pay attention to.
I think that your client contracts are some of the most important documents that you are going to have. There are so many pieces of that are going to be really just critical. And for the type of business that you're in, there's certain pieces that you're going to need client approval. So you need to make sure that all of the steps are documented. What I like to remind people is those agreements and those contracts should be a collaboration. Both parties need to understand what is expected and required of them, so it kind of helps that relationship move forward smoothly, so there's no guesswork. So what you need to do, always have your payment provisions outlined, because that's really the number one thing that I see people fight about, are you haven't paid me on time, you haven't paid me yet. Make sure it's clear how you're supposed to get paid, when you're supposed to get paid, and if there's something you have to do to get paid.
Okay.
Next, make sure you know if something is going bad and one of you needs to terminate, make sure you know how to do it. Because a lot of times, I don't want to say anything bad about clients, but I'm sure that somebody out there
you don't have to worry about that here.
maybe has had a crazy client in the past that, maybe things have gone bad, and like maybe you're a month into the job and you're like, oh my goodness, this is not good. This is not where I want to be anymore. And you may think that it's toxic and you need to get out of it. What are your rights to terminate that contract? But also, if the other party thinks that there is an issue, what are their rights to terminate? So make sure that all of that is outlined so that if one of you needs to pull the plug, you know what happens.
Can I ask you a question right there in that,
course.
though? So I understand the need for a designer who's got him or herself in a situation, like you said, that you're 2 or 3 months into the project and you can just say, this is not a good place for me or my business to be in. But what sorts of things can you put in a legal document that are rational things as a basis for termination? I mean, I don't imagine you can just say, well, I personally think you're a nut job and you're driving me crazy and I can't sleep at night. So you know what I'm saying? Like, what are some of the legal things that a designer could, I understand, like missed payments, that's clear. But what are the are there intangibles that you can say that this is not proceeding along because of XYZ and therefore I have the right to terminate? Like,
if you want to, if both parties agree to it, you can have a contract that says either party can terminate with X amount of notice to the other party.
Oh, without explanation. In other words, then you don't have to say it's because you're crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You can just say,
and they'll never know that they're crazy. So I was going to say, maybe they'll know, but they don't. They never realize it.
Okay, but I like that. I'm making a big joke out of it, but the reality is that you want to maintain a professional demeanor throughout the entire process, and you never want to actually say anything degrading or demeaning to a person that you've worked with. But there is self-preservation sometimes where you do need to be able to extricate yourself from a design project, and you need to know how to do it professionally. So that's what it is. You're just saying that you can have a line item in your LOA that says either yourself as the designer or your client can terminate with X amount of notice or whatever, and under these circumstances, like all the outstanding invoices are paid or whatever the little details are. Is that correct?
Yeah. And you can say that you can be paid for whatever has been completed, that kind of thing. If it was a job where you were getting a deposit and then paid at the end, you can just make sure that it's clear how you will be paid for the work that's already been completed if something terminates. That, I think, is the most important thing. So often I see contracts where people will say, you've got the right to terminate within 7 days, and then that's it. It kind of stops. And there's nothing that's left in there to say, okay, well, what happens to anything that hasn't been paid, or what happens to all the work I've done up until now?
Right. Right.
So
and from the client standpoint, for deposits or things that have been paid that haven't been delivered. I mean, you want, the idea of a great contract protects both sides. That's the point, a win-win. That's the best contract.
Exactly. And I think that it's also really important for anyone in a professional service to make sure that it's really mapped out extremely clearly what you're being engaged for. And I know that this seems probably very basic, but you can put down, I'm going to redesign your kitchen. And you may mean one thing, but if that turns into, oh, but we have an attached open floor plan, and I'm not a designer, obviously, so I'm probably using all the wrong words. But if that turns into, oh, no, you're supposed to include this nook over here and this over here, we consider that our kitchen. No, make sure that it's really clear exactly what you're being engaged for. The other thing I think is absolutely critical, in any time you are kind of setting those parameters, that's the best time to set boundaries with your client. Boundaries that are going to help you work for them and help your relationship be productive and professional. I see so many people get into situations where they're like, oh my gosh, I was way too over responsive with this client in the beginning, and now they expect me to respond to them at 10 o'clock when they email me on a Friday night.
Don't get me started on that.
Oh, I know. So what you can do is say, I may take this amount of time to get back to you. I may take, this is the only way I'm going to accept communication is either by phone or by email. You may not text message me with any type of change. If you text message me with something, it better be memorialized in an email after the fact if it's a change.
Which is definitely a good practice, by the way.
Oh, for sure. Make sure get it all in writing. Always in writing. Always.
Right.
So I think those are some of the things that are going to be really important to make sure, again, your whole goal here is, let's face it, what do you want to get out of this? You want to get hired, do the job, do an amazing job, get hired again, and then have them refer you to every single one of their friends, right?
Right.
So nobody wants to see the contract go bad. No one. What we want to do is make sure that you can really guide that relationship within that letter of engagement so that you are really setting yourself up for success and making sure that your client knows what will happen so that they are on the same page as to what success looks like.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. So we're talking about so far the components of a good contract for an interior design professional would be payment provisions outlined in the contract, how and when and how that happens, termination discussion on how and when and what happens and who gets paid and what happens with the monies and how many days, the scope of work, state clearly exactly what you understand that you are being hired to do, and then set communication boundaries, set standards for communications. So are there other parts of this LOA that you think would be included and be necessary?
The other piece that I'm going to talk about, and this is where it gets a little bit of legalese involved, is your indemnity provisions and making sure that in certain types of claims, you're going to be held harmless. So if this can be something where that situation with the painter that we talked about, if something happens with a subcontractor, should you be brought into it or will they hold you harmless? So these are the types of provisions that you can have in your agreement. I don't want to go too far into those because it really does get into a lot of jargon that I think makes people
their eyes glaze over.
Confused. Yeah. So that doesn't make for good podcasting.
Can I ask you just a question or two about that? I'll try and
of course.
keep it spicy. One of the things that occurs to me is it as simple as saying, like I'm thinking about if I'm the consumer now, if I'm reading this LOA and it says, designer A will be held harmless if painter B, ruins your Tibetan rug. I'm going to I might as a consumer look at the designer and say, no, I don't think so, sweetie. If you hire that painter, he's yours and whatever happens, you're included in. Is it just as simple as you saying, well, no, that's not how I work? Or are there gray areas in all of that?
I think there are gray areas because everything can be negotiated. Your standard client contract does not have to always be what's signed. Every provision can be agreed upon. And there are certain things that are going to be so far out of the scope of control of you can't
what
foresee
it.
With the aquarium and the rug. It's so hard to foresee that those things will happen.
Right.
So that's something where you can make provisions to say, certain things will be covered here. You can limit your liability because a lot of times, and that will depend on where you live, how much of a limitation of liability you can put into it. There are some contracts, depending upon where you are, where you can simply say, the value of the contract is as high as I can be held responsible. Anything else over and above that, you're waiving. So it depends also on where you are as to how much you can waive to get out of. But those are some of the things that I think are really important. And then that's something that you would also want to make sure is covered in your subcontractor agreement. And so that's a secondary contract you would need.
With the subcontractor, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but for that first contract with your client, it sounds like you're saying that you literally can just have it in there, that you're not held liable for the subcontractors you bring in. And if the client pushes back, then it can be an open negotiation, but you can actually state it, is what you're saying. Whether it holds up and whether they push back is a different discussion, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay.
You can pretty much contract for anything.
Okay. So it's not a bad idea to just put it in there. And then if something, and I guess I could see, if I were the consumer, I could see if I'm working with a designer and I hire my own painter to paint the colors that he or she picked, then it's like, that's a no-brainer. That's not your liability. But if I think I would press the designer back on that. I'd be like, wait a minute, you're going to bring in 5 trades here and you're not responsible for any of them? I think, but what you're saying is that's just me, one consumer that has that little nudge, and another consumer just says, okay, I don't care. It's fine. Okay. But as a designer, we're suggesting we start there.
I think it would be unusual for somebody to accept it. You can certainly write it. You can also say that we'll be held harmless for things that were not due to willful negligence. There's a lot of different ways
that's a nice
that
way
you can
to put
phrase it, because that's an accident.
That's
so
right.
It's not like he didn't mess up the rug on purpose.
No.
So there's a lot of different ways that can be configured to make it. And it also comes down to how there's certain things that you probably should be responsible for within your contract. You want to make it fair to both parties. So it will really depend on how you want to phrase those things. But those are certain areas that you definitely want to make sure that when you're looking at that letter, make sure that you've got an indemnity provision in there that you like and understand, because that is something that a client would potentially come back and say, you know what, I don't like what's covered here. So just make sure you know what you have in your contract.
Well, and that's a great point, too. Just don't copy a paragraph off the internet and put it in there, not even understand what the heck you're talking about. For sure. You know, like, oh, it says that, does it? Okay. All right. And then so that did lead us right into the other thing. So you are suggesting that there's contracts with the subcontractors.
Mm-hmm. Anytime, if you are the person who is directly hiring and directly responsible. So I think a big thing there is who's paying people. That's one way that you can look at it. Is the homeowner going to be responsible for cutting checks for all the subcontractors? Then what you may want to do is say, I'm sort of facilitating this as part of my fee, but you'll be directly contracting with those subcontractors as well, with those people who are going to be doing painting or whatever the case might be. And then they would enter into a separate contract there.
Right, or then it's up to the homeowner to cover themselves and the contractor to cover himself between the two of them in their own agreement.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And if you are responsible for it, then you definitely want to have some kind of contract with them that really goes into what all the roles and responsibilities will be, for sure.
Okay. Well, you know, it's interesting because you know, I think that so many of us really just function on good faith trust. You know, especially between vendors and designers and contractors and so forth like that. I mean, I've never had an interior designer ask me to sign any sort of contract like that where they, you know, remove themselves of responsibility for what I did or whatever. And I also can tell you that we have had situations over the 30 plus years where we have broken something or we have caused whatever, but we don't function that way. We're just like, it's ours. We got this. We're writing checks. Who's coming in to fix all this? You know what I mean? But you don't know that every vendor, every contractor is going to be that way. So I guess it's something that you have to take on a case by case basis. And that's also just proves the point that you really do need good trusted vendors too.
Exactly. It's so important to vet who you are working with and to make sure that they have the appropriate licensing, the appropriate insurance. Because if something does go bad, you need to make sure that they are covered and that you've got some type of something to fall back on if there is an issue.
Right. Well, that is a big thing. I mean, you know, if you're a grown-up business person, you have business insurance. And of course, we've never had anything that we've had to use our business insurance on. I'm thinking one time, you know, the guys were putting an awning up and I forget what they did, but something in all the electricity went out in the house. It was man. Oh, we hit a wire, you know, but then we call our electrician and we fix it. And I don't know if it costs us $500 or $2,000. But we do, you know, and then another time my husband, he backed into somebody's curio cabinet and, you know, crushed about like 3 or 4 pieces of their extremely expensive glass collection. And it wasn't at all funny at the time, I can tell you.
I bet.
And then I'm thinking another time, oh my goodness, a woman had just had her hardwood floors done, and I'm standing there talking to her, and I don't know, one of the kids walked by me, hit my elbow, and there went my, 4-pound tape measure gouging right into her hardwood floor.
No.
I mean, you would just want to crawl up and die, but then you're like, well, it's a good thing it was only done a week ago. Let's get that guy back here.
Right.
But, I mean, we, like I said, we took care of out of pocket on each of those occasions, but we had business insurance. And so if any designer ever wanted to ask us that, of course I can produce that. And of course, anytime, it's interesting when you do the work in Manhattan and well, not anywhere, not just Manhattan, but any high rise, they're always asking, we have to send like 90,000 insurance documents to even walk in the door with a drill,
Right.
So, okay. So these are some really good things that go into our letter of agreement. Anything else in that area, Danielle, before I move on to other things I want to ask you about?
I think one thing that you also want to consider is, of course, confidentiality. I think that's so important to make sure, particularly when you are in the design field, make sure that your clients are okay with being included in your portfolio or how they are indicated within your portfolio. If you can use their name, if you can use their likeness, if you can use a testimonial from them, things like that, I think are also good to address. Particularly, a lot of people really do want to be able to feature things online now.
Right.
So is this person comfortable with you showing what you have done in their home? And that's something that can really be addressed within your confidentiality provision to say, everything is confidential about the terms of the agreement, et cetera. We do reserve the right to display publicly that we have worked with you. If you want to use their name and like a photo on your website, you can get a short likeness release that's included. That type of thing, I think, are really important so that there's peace of mind there for both sides so that they know what you will and won't discuss. Right.
And I have had some of the, top interior design firms in the country on the show that they're big projects. And, and part of what their LOA is, they say is, and we're going to photograph this project. Like that's what's happening. And if that's not okay with you, then we're not your firm. After everything else is agreed on, for them, it's a deal breaker if they can't photograph because they're doing full house or full floor projects, and that's part of what it is. But what you're also saying is that a client might be happy and okay with the photography release, but they don't want their name used or their city used or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that's where it's important for you I think it's very important to be transparent with your client as to what you will do with whatever design, whatever you take from it. So if it's photographs or, if you take video, what is it that you are looking to use and how are you planning to use it? Is this something that you are going to use on a brochure? Is it something that you're just going to list on your website? Make sure that it's really clear about what exactly will be done and just make sure that they're okay with it. Because you may have somebody who is extremely private who doesn't want a photo that could potentially be recognized of the inside of their home, just depending on who it is and their personal preferences. So I always say it's better to be safe than sorry because you never want to be in the situation where you put something in your portfolio online or something along those lines and then have them come back to you and be like, you violated this. Like no one wants to see a breach of their agreement based on something that should be relatively easy to address.
Right. So somebody so what you're saying is express it that I intend to use this just for my website, or I intend to use this in Instagram and Facebook and house and, make a brochure at it and, stick it on the ShopRite wall. I mean, this is just say what you want to do with it. And then the conversation can start with what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with from the client standpoint.
And make sure, you're clear about what you're going to include that may be their personal information. So say this will indicate your city. It won't have your name. Or if they're giving a testimonial of some sort, this could have a photograph that identifies your home, but we're only going to use your first name and last initial. We won't put the city there. Whatever it is that's going to give them that comfort level and whatever they're okay with.
Okay. I love it. All righty. Awesome. So now another area of our business that needs to have just a tiny bit of discussion is the website disclaimers and personal information collected. When I say that means, does that mean when somebody opts into your email list because they got your ebook? And are these the things that you're talking about when you talk about those types of things, Danielle?
Yes. What I recommend to people is you can essentially have one legal policy on your site that is typically going to be your terms of use. And I like to say that there's three main areas of your site terms that you really need. And those are going to be those legal terms, how somebody is allowed to use your site. It can literally be if you have a blog on there and you have comments enabled, do you have a comment policy? If you are selling an ebook or if you are selling some type of product that's affiliated with your site, what is your return policy? What is your purchase policy? It can talk about your copyrights, what people can and can't do. I mean, it can get as simple as, you're not allowed to hack my site. Like, that's a line that we use. It's phrased much more elaborately, but it is, you're not allowed to come in and mess with the back end of my site. Thank you. So, those are the things that are covered in one piece. Next, you need to have a privacy policy. And I think that privacy policies are absolutely critical, particularly depending upon where and how you do business. They're required by the state of California. So if you have any audience who's in California, you definitely want to make sure that you are covered there. But also, if you're using things like Facebook ads, or if you're an Amazon affiliate, you need to make sure that you have a privacy policy. That's something that they require when you sign up for those programs.
What does that mean? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, a privacy policy, it basically covers 3 or 4 main areas. First of all, what personally identifiable information do you collect? So it's exactly what you said. You collect information from an opt-in, you get their name and email address. You need to disclose that you are collecting things.
Okay.
Number 2, how do you use it? So I use it to send you emails. I use it for order fulfillment. I use it for whatever the case might be, and how you use it, just disclose so they know what's happening with their information. Next, cookies. Cookies are a big thing. That's something that the files that we insert on the browsers makes it a little easier, makes your things know who you are. I sort of make fun of my mom in all of these interviews that I do, and like when I'm speaking, and I feel a little bit bad, but not really.
Not bad enough not to use it.
Like, let's say you go to like whatever site it is, Amazon, and you're looking at something you might want to buy, and then you get a retargeting ad once you go onto Facebook.
Right.
That freaks people out, and they're like, oh my gosh, they're following me. Well, most people who are doing business online know that that's the retargeting pixel.
Right.
So if you are using Facebook ads or Instagram ads or Google ads, make sure that you're disclosing that you're using a retargeting pixel, that, when they visit the site, it's going to place a cookie on the browser, and it may be used for retargeting.
Now, let me ask you a question. You're saying that on our website, we should have a little line at the bottom, or is there like a tab that it says privacy policies, and then we put all this there? And if somebody wants, like, how do you?
I usually put it in the footer,
where
you see something where, like, people will I've seen people just label it legal. I've seen people label it as terms of use, site terms.
Oh, and then when you click on it, it explains it. It opens it up.
And it's like pages of stuff. It's lengthy. And then the last piece that you want to include there are any disclaimers that you may need. So that's really going to depend on what kind of content your website includes. The easiest way to give a disclaimer example is to say, let's say you do workouts, right? And I think that's the most obvious disclaimer, where you say, I'm not a doctor, and you need to consult with your doctor before starting any type of exercise program.
Right.
And if you get hurt, because exercise can hurt you, that's not my fault.
Right.
So you basically say, this is for informational purposes only. How you use the information that I am providing to you, or if you need to consult with a professional of some sort prior to using it, that's on you.
So that's very applicable to interior designers, because they might have a blog post on how to hang a mirror in your bathroom, and somebody could hang the mirror and it fall down and crack and whatever else, and then call you up and say, you're a moron, you didn't teach me the right way to hang a mirror, which of course is absurd, right?
And then I broke my $5,000 antique mirror. Yeah. Exactly. And what I think is really important there is, what you're doing on your website is providing people with information. Unless they have entered that engagement with you, you're not working with them directly. So it needs to be made clear from your policies that you are here to give them information, and it is up to them how they manage that information.
Right.
And I think it's also important when you get into things where, especially if you've had a successful business, like with your podcasting, you're starting to give people advice on how they do business. That's something where you can also say, look, this has worked for me. I can't guarantee that this is going to work for you. So those are the kind of things that I always say, take a look at what you include. And I think that it can be really important for DIY and home improvement and tutorials of really any sort to say, I've tried this stuff and it worked here. Can't guarantee it's going to work for you.
And is it enough for that to be embedded in that terms of use or legal word at the bottom, and it opens all up? It doesn't have to be point blank on every blog post. Hey, you know, I'm not promising you this will work for you. It just worked for me. It can just be in that legal terms of use.
Yes, it can be in the disclaimers can be in the terms. That's fine.
Okay. And let me ask you a question. I have no idea if I have any of this on my website. If somebody built my website and I paid them their grown-up business and their real business, do you make an assumption that they've probably done that? I know you can't make any assumptions. That's silly. I know. I'm taking that right back. I'm reeling that right back. But is it more likely that they've done it? Because I'm thinking about the designers that build their own website. Like, if they don't know to do this, then they don't do it. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like, do most professional people that build a website do this for you? I got to go to my website while we're talking. I have no idea.
No, usually if somebody is building out a design for you, they're not including anything other than what you give them. So you would need to hand them the policy and say, here's the content that you're going to put here. And if they build out the link for you, they can do that, but it's up to you to provide the content.
Yeah, I don't have anything. I'm looking at the bottom, my bottom header. I don't have anything that says legal use or disclaimer or any of that stuff. Okay, awesome. Okay, so we need a phone call there. Okay, so now let me ask you a question about that, Danielle. Is this a big project for me now? Like, do I have to hire somebody like yourself to write all this, or can I just simply... Because I'm thinking about exactly what the designer should be thinking about. We do blog posts on how to do a window treatment. And if, you know, somebody's going to go out there and take the advice and then, you know, pop a pipe because they don't know where to drill the thing, you know, can I just say something as simple as this advice contained in whatever blogs you read or yada, yada, or does it need to be a huge document? Like a huge legal thing.
It doesn't need to be a huge document. If you don't have anything, that's something that we do really frequently for people. And the one thing about that is it's not a super lengthy project. Usually those take 2 or 3 hours for us to complete. And that's something that's really thorough and covers absolutely everything. But you can add a disclaimer that simply says, you know, I can't make any promises. All information is for informational. Everything presented on this website is for informational use only. It is up to you. You know, we're not responsible for anything. It doesn't have to be something that is, you know, legal 20 pages long.
Right. Okay.
So, but it's definitely something where if you need overall site terms, that can really be something that you would want to talk to your lawyer about and just kind of check in with them and say, okay, I don't have site terms, I don't have a privacy policy, and I need some disclaimers. Can you just come up with one document that includes everything for me? Okay. And that's something that's usually not a super lengthy process.
Well, and also, too, I mean, you happen to be an expert, a lawyer who is an expert in this particular avenue of business, the, you know, website and disclaimers and FTC and all that stuff. But not every run-of-the-mill lawyer. Like, if I am just picturing calling our lawyer, he'd be like, a what? And I don't know. I'm making an assumption. Right. But, you know, if you're usually your lawyer is a litigator, this isn't the wheelhouse, right?
That's very likely going to be the case. Because I know my husband is also a lawyer. And if I said to him, hey, can you pop up some website terms for me? He would look at me and be like, no, but I would be happy to produce your custody agreement. So he's a divorce lawyer. So, you know, that's something where he would just be like, no, I don't know what I'm doing there. And that's something where if you're currently working with a lawyer and you know you just need certain aspects to be covered, we often work with other service providers and other lawyers who know this isn't my area. So can you handle this, this, and this? And we're always happy to do that.
Because I do think this is an important issue for interior designers because so many interior designers have blogs. And I don't care if it's a blog that's read by 5 people with your mother as one of them, or 20,000 people, or 1 million people, if you've given any one person an advice on how to do something, then boom, you've given somebody advice. How does it, Danielle, extend to, say, this big move now to Facebook Live, where one of the strategies, marketing strategies that, you know, I'm talking to expert after expert, that's like, pop on Facebook Live and show them how to where to hang the mirror and how to pick the rug and all that stuff. Is there liability there that we have to think about?
I would do a quick one-liner at the beginning of it that just says, hey, I'm going to show you how to do this. This has worked in the environment where I'm doing it. Here's what I think. I think that we tend to overly complicate a lot of legal documents with a ton of legalese. Legalese has its place, but when you're doing something like a video, it doesn't have to be overly formal. You can do that in a more casual, natural language sort of tone where you say, this is what's going to work for what I'm doing. If you have, a different type of environment, please be careful. This might not work for you, but this is going to give you a general idea of how to proceed.
So you're not making it like this big, bold statement but you're just weaving in there, use your common sense. And I've warned you to use your common sense.
I live in Las Vegas, so everything out here, all of my walls are textured. And so when I lived on the East Coast, nothing was. Everything, I don't know what the right words are. Everything was just, like the flat type of
sheetrock walls, yeah.
There you go. And so I think that if you're talking about teaching somebody like how to do a paint effect or how to do different things there, what you're going to need to show me on a textured finish is going to be different from what you would show somebody who has a different type of wall. So it's easy enough to say, look, this is the type of conditions that I'm doing it in. It might not work for you, but this gives you a general idea so that you can do this for yourself in your area.
I like it. Okay, so that's good. I like that. So this is, really very important. And how does it extend to YouTube? I mean, my niece is 13 years old, and almost every single time I have a conversation with her, I say to her, how did you learn how to do that? YouTube. How did you learn where did you find that out? YouTube. I mean, she just all day long she does these fantastic braids to her hair. She taught herself songs on the piano. Those are not things that have heavy liability, but also too, when Kimberly at my office, her father was trying to fix their dryer and they couldn't figure out how to do it. And she Googled it on YouTube, how to fix the dryer.
I love YouTube.
Does that guy have liability? Yeah. Does that guy have liability if, God forbid, her father does what he says to do on that YouTube video and then the dryer, is not hooked up right and there's a cancel fire? I mean, where does that liability end? Or is it just the same thing that a smart person teaching that on YouTube would simply say, this is my dryer in my house and this is how it worked?
That is how I would do it.
Okay.
I think that
same difference then. Okay.
Here's what I often think it comes down to. We live, unfortunately, in a relatively litigious society. I think that people like to sue over things that I would not normally think you should sue over.
Right.
I think that we see some of those lawsuits pretty regularly. So the thing is, a lot of those lawsuits may not stick. Right. But if that were to happen, do you really want to be in a situation where you still have to defend a nonsense lawsuit? Because let me tell you, even defending a nonsense lawsuit that gets thrown out can cost you 5 figures.
That's right.
And that's just craziness. Nobody wants to have to deal with that. So I think that it's always better. I'm a big fan of just protect yourself from the start. And you can put a super easy disclaimer. I've seen people do like the slides, inserting that in their YouTube video where it says a basic disclaimer. And you always will see that on workout videos. It's not my fault if you get hurt, talk to a doctor. Okay. And that's the kind of example that I always use. Do a really quick slide that will display before your video that says, I have tested this in my home. This is what worked here. I can't guarantee that this is going to work for you. I'm not liable if anything goes wrong. You can do it that way. You can do it through just a really quick, introductory phrase. You can put it into the comment section. There's a lot of ways that you can convey it just to make sure that it's clear. I'm not liable if something goes wrong. Now, if you were to get sued for something like that, unless it was absolute willful negligence where you're like telling them that you're fixing their dryer and you're actually showing them how to wire it to set it on fire and haha, it's a prank kind of thing. Because let's face it, on YouTube, that could happen because people have real weird senses of humor. then in that type of situation where you were actually trying to cause harm, yeah, I think that a court
Your
would probably
disclaimer
be
isn't
like,
going to work.
yeah, it doesn't matter what you did. Your disclaimer doesn't work. This was on purpose, willful negligence. But the likelihood of somebody saying, I followed this thing and it didn't work, and this person, I'm suing them, is that going to make a big difference? I don't know many courts that would be like, yeah, this is your fault as the person who produced a video.
Right.
And I can't say that I've seen a lot of litigation for anything along those lines, but my view is always better to be safe than sorry, and just have it on there. If it's something that can take just like 10 seconds to do, pop it in. It's not going to hurt you to have it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I don't want anybody to think that either you or I really believe that there are tons of lawsuits happening out there from resulting in people executing ideas from blog posts. Okay. So I don't live in, on Mars and have no idea what's going on here. But I really pulled it all apart with you because of exactly what you just ended up saying is, if it's as easy as just having something inserted on your website that lives there and says, these are my opinions, they've worked for me, yada, yada, then why not, right? I mean, so I think that, and I'm more thinking so much about the very many bloggers that do every single week share their personal opinions and tips on how to execute projects. And so that it's not like we're in an industry where, well, this isn't likely to happen. I mean, they're doing it every day of the week. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
and I think that's when it's important just to make sure that's transparent with your audience if they do need to find it. Just like it's really important to make sure that you're disclosing. So if you're doing those types of tutorials and you're linking to Amazon with an affiliate link, make sure you're disclosing. Make sure that you have a policy that says I might use affiliate links. If I use an affiliate link, I'm going to get a commission. Right. So it's that level of transparency where I think some people feel like it's going to turn their audience off, where to me, it turns me off if I know that somebody's doing it and I'm not being told, because it's pretty obvious when it's an affiliate link and there's no disclosure.
Right.
So just make sure you're being transparent about what you're doing and how that can really translate for your audience, because that to me is the key. And if something didn't work, just say it. This didn't, there's nothing worse to me than when somebody tries to make it look like 100% A+ on a product that they're trying, and you can tell that maybe there were some struggles, and it doesn't feel authentic and honest. Right,
exactly. Okay, all right. So here's what we covered. We covered setting up your business entity for, speak in English, an entity formation, right? You want to form your entity. Okay. So you want to decide if you're going to go, I'm going to use the word risky, sole proprietor route. You're going to do the LLC or the corporation. We are going to give careful look to our LOA, our letter of agreement, and we're going to make sure that we have language in there that talks about our payment provisions. We're going to have language that talks about termination policy and what happens and how either party can terminate. We're going to have language that talks very clearly about the scope of work that we're going to provide and what we're not going to provide. We're going to set up communication standards, what's okay, how you can do a change order, how you can communicate with my office that is, let's say binding for lack of another way, right? We're going to have an indemnity provision. Okay. So that we have all of that covered, and we're going to understand what's in that provision and how to describe it. And that's the other thing with all of this. With the letter of agreement, we're going to actually go through this verbally with our client when we take their money. We're not just going to hand it to them, drop it off, at their front door and then pick it up with a check later. We're actually going to read this to them. I feel that way, don't you, Danielle?
I think it's really important to make sure that both of you understand it, because let's face it, when you're handed a contract that's like 10 pages long, do you really want to read it?
No.
Like, I don't want to read them, and I do that. You know what I mean? So it's just like, if it looks like it's all boilerplate, depending on your relationship, they may just be like, I trust you here. Exactly. But no, I do think it's important to review it and say, okay, I need to make sure that you understand how I bill, how I'm going to communicate with you, how we do changes, how we do everything. Right. Like that, to me, I do think it merits a full conversation to say, I'm going to take pictures of your home and potentially post them online. Cool. It's that level of communication, I think, that really, it also really helps with customer satisfaction, so that they feel you're taking care of them at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have to say, I think that in my career, I've come across colleagues that feel uncomfortable being very specific about the terms of agreement when they're getting the deposit, for lack of a better way, when they're starting the conversation. But I always found that it's so much, if you think that's uncomfortable, the discomfort of when there is a problem and everybody's saying, well, I thought this and you never said that, that's beyond uncomfortable. To me, there's no comparison in the two levels of discomfort. I would much rather sit there and say, no, please, read this with me. Let me show it to you. Let's make sure we agree, yada, yada. And it's funny because ours isn't nearly as involved because we are not typically involved for many, many months with a client the way designers are. But even customers that I've had that's a fourth or fifth time with us, I turn it around. Here's what you're getting. Here's what we're doing. Here's how it's going to work. They're like, I know, LuAnn, I know. I'm like, I know you know, but I got to make sure you know. You know what I mean? You're going to sign your name on it, so I want you to see it, because then it's not even what I do is I have an invoice for WindowWorks that is in window jargon. Okay. It's in our internal jargon. But I do a separate written in English document that describes your window treatments, because I don't expect a person that doesn't do window treatments for a living to understand what what all of my symbols and all of my abbreviations mean. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know.
And I agree. And it's really the same way for the legal side. That's how I feel, is I don't always expect people to understand it. Just get a working knowledge of it and we can walk through it and I can help you translate it if you don't know exactly what that is. Because I think that's really going to be the key to succeeding in your client relationships so that you can get that repeat business. To me, that's always the goal. You always want to nail it and then get I made a nail joke on a interior design podcast. That was bad. I'm sorry. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't. But then you can have a really amazing experience and get all the repeat business and the referrals.
Right.
And that to me is the key, is making sure you've got to be comfortable having that conversation with your clients, because that's just part of the job. Be comfortable talking about who you are and what you're worth. That's a whole separate conversation. But, and that's something that should be outlined. The contract shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't. It should just be very straightforward as to here's what we've talked about. This memorializes it, and these are everyone's rights.
Exactly. I love it. It's awesome, Danielle. And I love, like I said at the top of the conversation, I love the way that you are available for, complete support and execution of everything, but available for one-off consultations, for questions and for explorations and for just getting things clarified. I think it's a terrific concept. I really do. I think it's a pretty awesome concept. You really take a lot of the intimidation out of it. And the truth is there's no excuse not to, set your business up like a grown-up. If there's services like yours out there, to just do it without all the pain and all the, waiting 4 weeks for an appointment and all that crap.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. So tell everybody, Danielle, how they reach you if they are interested in learning more about you and possibly availing themselves of your services.
Absolutely. Our website is HashtagLegal.com. My email is Danielle@HashtagLegal.com. And that's usually the easiest way to get me.
Okay. And you're on Twitter. Are you on the others? I know you're on Twitter. I follow you and interact with you a little bit there. But are you on Facebook and Instagram, or that's not really where lawyers hang out?
Not really on Instagram. I'm all over Facebook. I love some Facebook.
Okay.
Which maybe showing my age a little bit. I don't know.
I know. Well, it's happening. I know. It's true.
We're on Facebook right as #legal.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Danielle. I really do appreciate all of the advice you shared with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me again today for another episode of A Well-Designed Business. This podcast is a production of WindowWorks in Livingston, New Jersey, your trade resource for custom window treatments and awnings. Learn more about WindowWorks at www.windowworks-nj.com. All of our music is original music by Room 2 Productions. Please contact us if you want to learn more about original music for your business or your events.